Connor Beaton. Thank you for being here, bro.
Thanks for having me back. Been a hot minute.
Connor, why are so many men addicted to pornography but afraid of intimacy with a real woman? Like a real woman.
There's an opener, right? Just like, we're just going to lay it in like that. That's good. Porn is easy access, high reward, low risk. So there's not really a big risk of rejection. You're not going to be told no. The embarrassment factor is pretty low. The shame factor is pretty low. Whereas being rejected by a woman, or your advances don't go well, or the connection doesn't go well, it's embarrassing and it's hard, and there's a lot of rejection. And I think a lot of young men have not been raised to endure rejection in the ways that we used to. And so our threshold and our tolerance for rejection as men has, for a lot of guys, has significantly decreased. When you couple that with the very addictive nature of pornography and the function that it serves for most men, it's just a bit of a lethal combo. So pornography does this wonderful thing where I call it hitting the reset button. So for when you are a guy at the end of the day and you're stressed, or you're anxious, or you're bored, or you're lonely, or you're frustrated, or you hate your job, or maybe you've made an advance on your girlfriend or your wife and you got shut down or didn't go well, and you feel something internally that you don't like, porn is a great way to reset the neurochemicals and your nervous system. So it'll reset how you feel in your brain, and it'll reset how you feel in your body. And a whole chain of reactions will happen neurologically and physiologically that will basically put you into a more calm, easeful, relaxed state. So for a lot of guys, they don't necessarily get hooked on the pornography itself. They get hooked on, I feel something I don't like internally. I don't want to feel that way anymore. And so let me go jerk off, watch pornography, and feel a little bit better about myself and my life. So it's a form of escapism. It's also a great way to sort of, when I say great way, I'm not advocating for it necessarily in the way that I'm talking about it, but it's also an easy way for you to get a hit of feel better in the moment without having to really do too much. So, and then there's accessibility and your biological drive towards sexual reproduction, which is quite strong. So it's really it's a lethal combination in many ways. It's a lethal combination in many ways.
Is there anything inherently wrong with having a tug? And is there a difference between porn and just your imagination, maybe a video with you and a present partner, past partner? I don't know. So is there nuance to the craft of having a tug as a fella?
I mean, I'm not one of these like you should never jerk off dudes. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've definitely gone through the phase of like, no, no fap, no nut. I've done all that, and look, like, sure, rub one out sometimes. Have fun with it. Enjoy yourself. There's nothing wrong with it. Why watching porn? Like, I'm not saying that you should literally never watch porn the rest of your life, or that porn is the devil or anything, quite like that. It's more that there are subsets of men that are more susceptible to having an addictive relationship with pornography than other men. Some guys, they'll watch porn once a month or once in a while, and it's really not that big of a deal. Just like, you or I could go and have a drink or smoke a joint, and it's like really not that big of a deal. But then there's a smaller subset of men that have a predisposition towards addictive behaviors and tendencies. And those men are going to find that porn is like this easy access addiction that no one really knows about. And so I've worked with a lot of men where they can't go to sleep without watching porn and getting off, or they can't get out of bed in the morning without watching porn. For a lot of guys that have severe addictions, they're not even jerking off while they're watching pornography. So, I think this is like, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said, don't yuck my yum. I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. But there are men that are out there that know that they have a challenge with pornography. And I think when you look at some of this, some of the stats and some of the data, when it comes to porn, like a lot of men now, a lot of boys now are finding porn between the ages of 8 and 11. And when you think about an 8 or a 9-year-old boy finding porn, that kid for the most part hasn't even gone through puberty. So he's not even really in the place to experience it in a way that's even helpful. So it's just infiltrating mind, brain, what you think porn, sex should look like. You're pornifying your sort of sexual fantasies, and there is, again, in when you look at the experience of using porn over long periods of time, there is this correlation between the more porn you watch, the more graphic, the more sort of like raunchy and out there and strange you need it to be, because it's suppressing your stimulation. And this is what happens for a lot of guys, is that they have the post porn shame, that they've gone down this rabbit hole and they've watched something that all of a sudden they're like, holy shit, like I do not want anybody to find out about the corner of Pornhub that I just found myself in, because that feels despicable. So I think there's a lot of different layers to this. If you're getting off and you're using the I was going to say the spank bank, the memory bank of the good times. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with getting off. There's nothing wrong with watching porn. There's nothing wrong with, maybe you and your lady shot a video and like you're watching that. There's nothing wrong with any of that. Yeah.
I think it's like anything. It's not the what, but it's the why, and so if you're doing something from a state of neurosis, or and you're in a state of being out of control, and you're suppressing a feeling that you might not even actually have the language or the understanding or the resources to be able to pinpoint. You just know that you have this addictive behavior, but there's something deeper running where, in fact, there's a reasonable chance you may be running away from feeling something deeper. There's a quote from Jung that I wrote down in prep for this: is neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. And then, so neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. What do you think about that?
Neurosis, when you have these types of neurotic behaviors, obsessive compulsive disorders, when you have these, I was going to say mini addictive behaviors, but we'll just call them addictive behaviors. What they're often doing is that they are a coping mechanism or a function to protect you from an internal experience that you don't want to inhabit or really get close to. And so neuroticism, right? So for when you look at somebody like that needs to wash their hands, and they need to wash their hands a very specific way, and they can't stop washing their hands until they feel like they've washed their hands in a very specific way that leaves them feeling satiated. What they're really doing is they've created a behavioral pattern that allows them to circumvent the experience of the frustration or the sadness or the anger or whatever is underneath the surface. And so the behavioral pattern plays out to the point and degree where finally they feel a bit of reprieve from whatever it is that they're experiencing internally. And for a lot of guys, that's essentially what happens, is that, I wrote this in my book. I wrote a book called Men's Work years ago. And in the book, I talked about a couple of things. Number one, I said the first step in every man's journey is pain, that a man's work begins with pain. And a man's work begins with pain because we've been largely culturally conditioned to suppress whatever it is that we're experiencing that's unsavory. And so men have been sort of taught in an ineffective way to deal with their emotions. And I wrote in the book that, we've been taught that strength equals suppression, that the more you can just stuff shit down, the stronger you'll appear externally, but the weaker you will feel internally. And so for a lot of men, we have all of these maladaptive behaviors: porn, weed, booze, sexting. And not that sexting is bad. Again, it's taken these behaviors to the end degrees, right? Where you have to smoke weed every day, or you have to have a drink every day, or you have to sex that, whoever every single day. And these behaviors are there to offset the fact that most men are carrying around some type of intense pain or grief inside of them that no one has taught them how to deal with and how to reconcile with. And so whenever that comes up and they become aware of it, their brain says, "Oh, I know what to do with this. I'll go jerk off and watch porn." Like it's time to go and use that tool to reset how I'm feeling internally so I don't have to deal with this. So a lot of these coping mechanisms are just maladaptive strategies to deal with pain and suffering that most men are carrying around internally that they haven't actually been taught how to navigate.
You're temporarily putting out the superficial fires, but you're never actually addressing the root cause ember that keeps igniting the flames. What what are the repercussions if you don't actually get to the root of the potential suffering a person who's experiencing some type of neurotic pattern or behavior or addictive pattern behavior or depression or anxiety or fear or doubt or any of the feelings that do not cause a person to expand and feel more alive? If they're perpetually feeling that and they're escaping that, what are the consequences of not addressing the root, and how do we begin to address the root?
Yeah, well, Jung, to go back to Carl Jung, he had another great quote where he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you'll call it fate." And so essentially what he's saying there is your unconscious mind is full of a ton of different things, right? It's not just all the things you don't know how to do. It's all the nonverbal experiences that you had before you had memory or language. And it's also full of the stuff that you don't want other people to know about you, your pain, your anxiety, your depression, your the disdain that you have in your relationship to your girlfriend, or the sexless whatever that you found yourself in. So it's all of that type of stuff, your shame, your insecurities. And so when we don't address those underlying problems, what ends up happening is that unconscious material directs your life, right? So the way that I put this in my book is your pain has its own intelligence. Your pain has its actual own intelligence, and it's trying to come into your conscious recognition. And until you start to allow that, and you continue to try and stuff it down and repress it and suppress it, it's going to interrupt your life. And you will try and set a goal for yourself and you'll fail at it. You'll try and get closer to your girlfriend or your wife and you'll sabotage yourself. All of these well-meant intentions and aims that you start to create for yourself, there'll be all of these interruptions along the way. And those interruptions are your unconscious, this pain, this, repressed or suppressed suffering and grief or sadness or anger that's underneath the surface that has nowhere else to go. So I always talk about how sabotage, maybe this is a good aside to get into, but I always talk about how sabotage is not us longing for being out of control. This is a complete misunderstanding of the human psyche and the brain neurologically, not even the psyche. It's a misunderstanding of the neurological part of our brain. We sabotage to move back into control and to move back into a known pattern and cycle. So anybody that I have ever spoken to, any client that I've ever worked with, I say, "Tell me about what you do when you sabotage." And they'll map out every single step. It's like, well, I get home and I feel bored and I feel lonely, and my girlfriend's out, and then I think to myself, "Oh, should I text that chick?" And then I'm like, "No, I shouldn't text her." And then 5 minutes later, I like can feel it inside and I end up texting her. And then, half an hour later we're sexting, and then I invite her over and then we have sex. And then after that, this is how I feel. And then she goes home. And then the next day, this is how I feel. And, the shame spiral happens and blah, blah, blah. Almost every single person can map out front to back their sabotage cycles because they are cycles. They are known patterns. They are known behaviors. And your brain is a pattern recognition machine, right? You are wired to recognize patterns. And so your brain will actually steer you towards patterns that even if those patterns are harmful, and it will actively try and move you away from patterns that are unknown, even if those patterns are helpful. So this is the big challenge that a lot of people have when they're trying to create new habits, right? You have this whole feedback loop system baked into your brain that's reinforcing you to go back to behaviors and patterns that you know, even if they're not helpful. To eat the ice cream at 10:30 at night, or to hit the snooze button a dozen times, or to watch the porn video because it'll make you feel better. Your brain is going to incentivize you and trying to push you towards those things because you know them. So sabotage is not, I want to be out of control. Sabotage is, I want to move back into a cycle and a pattern that I know very, very deeply, even though it's not serving me.
Can exclusive talk therapy get to the root of these patterns, or do these patterns need to be surfaced and seen and known somatically, like through the body? Does like the energy of the body have to be worked with, or can we talk our way through these things to get to the root?
You can talk about these patterns and have a cognitive understanding of them, but in my opinion and in my experience from what I've seen, you have to be able to go into a somatic experience. You have to be able to go into a kind of physical processing, and I think this is especially true for men. Um, and it's especially true for men because we are very, very physical beings, and we have a lot of guys have lived lives that are oriented towards suppression. And where does that suppression go? It moves into the body, right? Like if you look at a lot of the, Bessel Vaynerchuk's and a lot of the work around nervous system, you can think of, or at least this is how I think of it. I think of the body as the unconscious mind, that your physical and somatic, your nervous system is part of your unconscious mind. And so I think about your brain, the thoughts that you have, that's the language of the brain, and your emotions are the language of the body. Your emotions are the language of your nervous system. And a lot of the times these patterns, and again, if you look at something like polyvagal theory and the vagus nerve that runs all the way up from the base of your tailbone all the way up to the base of your spine and into your brain, which is sort of like the highway of information between your body and your brain, there's 80% of that highway is going from going from the body to the brain, and then 20% is from the brain down. So your brain is actually receiving a ton of information from the body and only sending out a small portion of information down to the body. So talk therapy is great if you want cognitive understanding. Things like CBT can be helpful in understanding these things and kind of getting past some of these things in a surface level way. But what I find for a lot of men is there needs to be some type of physical, I was going to say confrontation, but there needs to be some type of physical process that you go through to deal with the anxiety, the depression, the anger, the frustration, the buried grief and sadness. All of that needs to have a vehicle to come out.
I was just talking with Peter Levine, the guy who founded Somatic Experiencing, maybe a week ago or so. Had him we had a conversation, and one of the questions I had for him that I'm curious your perspective on is, it seems a little confusing to me in a way that the body is not intelligent enough, which obviously it is, and there's something I'm missing, to be able to detect that in the past there was something very traumatic and challenging that my nervous system had to suppress and kind of push aside to address later. And now it is subtly or grossly dominating my life and creating problems everywhere I look. My relationship's messed up. I'm sabotaging everything. I'm in debt. I am, reactive. I get into fights. I went to jail, like whatever the thing is. Why is the body not intelligent enough to just say, hey, we're just going to process this stuff for you because we care about survival most? Why do you need to complete the cycle of stress in a physical way? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, I think so. I'll do my best to answer what I
Do
think
you
you're
do
asking.
like why, like there's such a big unlock in seeing a therapist and being seen, like being witnessed in your emotions and being able to actually have an empathetic witness be able to kind of like complete those processes that maybe when you were 10 years old or 15 years old or any of the times. And you can kind of return back to that version of yourself and be like, oh my God, I've been holding on to these frozen feelings for the last 30 years. And they've just been sitting there lodged in my neck or throat or somewhere in my body.
Yeah.
Why is it that you have to go through the physical action of that? And like the value of completing that whole cycle, like going full circle. And I mean, it's kind of just a silly hypothetical. I don't
No,
know.
it's
Like,
great. You're sort of pointing to the answer in the question, which is that we are relational beings, and that our bodies have a natural predisposition towards needing those emotions to be witnessed in some capacity. And so when you look at horses, I just went last week and did one of my good friends and mentors and colleagues, Dewey Freeman. He's a expert in equine therapy, and I went and spent a day with him with some friends, and we're working with horses and learning about how to work with them. And when you see a horse that's been under stress or duress, or you see a duck or you see a dog that's been under stress and duress, they have a system to or a method to sort of reshape or shake off that stress that sort of breaks itself into the sympathetic nervous system. And so you see that right after two ducks fight or after two dogs fight, they'll walk away to their own sides and then they'll shake their whole bodies. And in doing that, they're literally shaking off the quote unquote trauma or the stress from that altercation, and they're resetting their nervous system. And we don't necessarily have the same thing within our infrastructure. Ours is a little bit different in the sense that we can do some of those things, right? You can shake, you can dance, you can tap, you can do bioenergetics and release, with a wiffle bat and stuff like that. You can sort of scream and stuff like that. But ours is an energetic sharing. And so a lot of what needs to happen is that suppressed emotion or pain or grief or trauma needs to be shared, and it needs to be witnessed. And Jung actually said the first step in any therapeutic process is confession. So in that, he's really saying the first step is some type of sharing of your experience. It's not just admission of what you've been doing or going through, but it's the admission of the experience that you've been carrying. And so to own that in front of another is the relational piece that so many of us are missing. And I'll leave you with maybe the last words that I think will help with this, which is, again, my friend Dewey talks about how we're wounded in relationship and we have to heal in relationship. So a lot of the traumas, the abuses, the neglect, the abandonment, a lot of pretty much every single piece of pain that we've experienced has been relational. It's been at the hands of or because of someone else, or it's been in relationship with someone else. And so part of that therapeutic process is that we can't just sort of quote unquote shake those things off. Our body needs to repair itself in relationship. This is why when we hold a men's weekend as an example, there's something very, very powerful about what we're doing, because we're holding every single man in that group becomes like an extended nervous system for the man who's going through the piece of work, so that his nervous system doesn't have to hold and contain the intensity of the trauma or the abuse or the abandonment or the neglect that he experienced, that it kind of gets to get dissipated through the collective nervous system. And that's where the wisdom of our body really resides. We've just shifted away from that. We've convinced ourselves, I should be able to get through this all on my own. I should be able to deal with this all on my own. And we've adopted this kind of hyper individualistic stance on what, quote unquote, healing should look like, or transformation or change, or however you want to phrase that. So all of it needs to be relational is sort of the short way to say it.
if you were able to plug into the emotional pain of most men, what would they be silently, internally screaming while they maintain a stoic veneer?
Well, I do in many ways experience this firsthand. I mean, I get messages daily from men who are really struggling. I think what I hear a lot of men saying, and what I see within a lot of men, is just a very deep level of loneliness. Um, and not, maybe not loneliness that they don't have people in their life, but loneliness that parts of who they are don't have a place in their relationships. So how they're screwing up, how they feel like they're failing, their pain from childhood, the grief or the sadness that they're carrying around inside of them. You know, every man that I've ever worked with has an intensity inside of him that he's likely not been taught how to navigate, and that intensity doesn't actually have a place in his relationships. And I think that this is in part why modern therapy has been failing a lot of men, is that when you look at the therapeutic process, for the most part, not every single therapeutic process, but when you look at most therapeutic processes, it's all about expression of how you feel. And that is good to an extent. But the other piece of what men are dealing with is that they don't feel useful, they feel useless, they don't feel competent, they don't feel like they're able to contribute, and they actually do not feel wanted. I think there's this huge narrative within modern society that's telling men, you're not needed, you're not wanted, right? Whether that's in a relationship, whether that's in the culture, whether that's in, you know, a work environment or a family system. I think so many men grow up and enter into our culture and society with the messages of man bad, you are wrong for being a man. And sometimes it's very subtle, and sometimes it's really, really loud. You know, there's um, I'll give you, maybe this is like an extreme example, but I remember somebody sending me a year or two ago an article from a woman, who, she had written an article about a conversation that she had with her son, talking to her son about how all men are rapists, and all men, you know, have the capacity for murder, and that you know, you are inherently bad. It's this concept of original sin that has kind of entered into modern day conversation and been projected onto men, that you are inherently bad for being a man. I call it the patriarchy virus, and it's this idea that any problem that exists in the world is the result of men in the patriarchy. And that ideology, I think, has infiltrated a lot of the cultural conversation. And so a lot of men, you know, they look out at social media, they look out at the workplace, they look out at relationships, they see dating apps, and they're like, I don't know if I'm wanted or needed in any of these spaces. I don't know if I'm honored or welcomed, you know, in any of these places, or respected or loved or accepted, without having to sort of mold to a certain cultural conversation and narrative. So I think, to sort of distill this down, I think a lot of men that I've worked with, that I've seen, have a very deep loneliness inside of them. And I think that there's a very deep pain of wanting connection, wanting closeness, and not really being able to attain it, and being vastly misunderstood. You know, I think a lot of men find a good amount of purpose and meaning in being useful to the people that are in their lives. And you can see this, I'll leave you this one last piece here. You can see this in like suicide notes, for an example. In the UK, they did research, and Richard Reeves, who is now a part of the Institute for Boys and Men, and they looked at suicide notes that men left behind. And one of the most common words from men was the word useless. And so I think for a lot of men, they really do feel in different ways useless, whether or not they feel like they're letting their girlfriend down, or their wife down, or their kids down. They're not able to provide. They don't feel like they're able to get themselves under control, and so their habits are completely, you know, wilding out, and they're drinking and smoking, and they don't like who they are. But those are some of the core pieces.
That's beautiful. It feels like there's almost maybe a couple layers. One is for a man feeling like they have use, or, you know, speak first person, like I have a purpose, is something that, like, it fills me with energy in a way. And it almost I feel like you can get by for a long time just by having a purpose, just like by being a tool. And then I feel like there's another layer within that, of also like the trickier layer, because the purpose one's a little bit more straightforward. It's very complex and challenging and daunting for a lot of people. But then there's the being felt part, and something I think it's like I heard this from I think you and listening to another podcast in preparation for this. And it just makes sense. If you're not able to fully feel your feelings, then people are not able to feel you. And if people are not able to feel you, you will feel alone. And so bridging that gap of being able to actually express out and be like, yeah, like there's no aspect of myself that I'm actually afraid of. Like I've been courageous enough to feel all of the parts of myself. And I'm not just hiding in stoicism and hiding in rationality. Like there's some aspects of me where I feel completely fucking out of control and I feel terrified. And I was a very small boy at one point, and there were situations where I was deeply scared. And I feel courageous enough now in myself to be able to share that and be seen in that. I think that's the cycle. And then on the other side of that, I think is liberation and freedom. And I think it's like bridging that gap to be able to actually, feel safe enough to be seen in the parts of you that you don't perceive to be powerful. I think is kind of the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think for a lot of men, it's like my pain doesn't have a place in the world,
Yeah.
or
What's the utility of my pain?
completely. Yeah. And I mean, one of the things that we say at, at men's weekends is nothing that you have to say, nothing that you've been through is going to be too much, and I remind men of this when I work with them. It's like, I can handle whatever it is that you have to bring, however intense it might be. And I think that is part of the difference, is that a lot of men have experienced some really intense things, or they have this very deep intensity inside of them that they've convinced themselves no one else will be able to understand or contend with. And their lives are literally designed around protecting the people around them from this intensity that's inside of them. And so they never really feel deeply known, because it's like, well, if only you knew this part of me. I'm so fucked up in this way. Nobody else has gone through this. Nobody else has had these things happen to them, or whatever it might look like. And so for a lot of men, there's this perspective that my pain, my suffering, is so deep and so intense that if I let it out, and I see this all the time with, I've been fortunate enough to work with some pretty incredible men. And one of the things that inevitably happens is, well, if I let this out, I won't be able to perform. If I let this grief out of the bag, or this sadness or this anger out of the bag, I won't be able to perform. And I won't be able to provide. I won't be able to, what will happen in my marriage? How will I be as a father? And so it's this thing inside of us that so many men, I think, contend with, that they don't necessarily know how to deal with. And it's a bit of a paradox, I think, to be a young man in today's society, because guys are constantly being told, open up more, be more vulnerable, right? I call this the myth of vulnerability, that every problem for you as a man will be magically solved if you're just more vulnerable in your life. It's like, no, that's not inherently true. Like, we do have to be vulnerable with some specific people in our lives, and we have to learn what to do with the pain that we are carrying inside of us. That part's true, but it's not just about, emotionally vomiting on your wife or your girlfriend every single time you feel insecure or afraid or sad or whatever. That probably is not responsible, and that will cause some rift between the two of you. So there is nuance to this. It's not like, be more vulnerable and everything will be solved.
Yeah. If you are not regulated with the way that you emotionally kind of vomit, or purge or release your stuff, you might find out that the world's not a safe place to be seen in. And you might have a confirmation of like, oh my God, it's not safe for me to go. It's like, you're not in the right room. Like there's certain people that, yeah, like this is the time, like you paid this person $250 or whatever to go in on this, like this is what we're doing surgery right now. And that's not going to be the person at checkout at Walmart. And you might find out that, like, yeah, the world's not safe. It's like, yeah, it's because you don't have discretion with the way that you're gushing out your stuff. So how does that show up in relationship? Like, how deep can we go with an intimate partner, and where is it more appropriate to have a friend, or where is it more appropriate to have a therapist, or like, how do we kind of compartmentalize our inner space to be able to share in a way that actually is safe?
Yeah, well, I think this is a conundrum for a lot of people because modern relationships have become this ground where people expect their significant other to be everything for them. You know, I want you to be my coach and my best friend and my therapist and my cheerleader and my lover and my affair partner and all, every single part of it, um, and more. And so, I do think it is striking a balance with the relationship that you're in. I think that transparency is incredibly important. I do think that a lot of men have under-indexed and have underestimated the power of having really solid men in your life where you can bring the depths of whatever it is that you're going through, whatever it is, whether it's financial, physical, health wise, in your relationship, and having solid men that can actually support you through whatever it is that you're going through so that you can find some type of measured or stability or groundedness when you do bring it into your significant other, when you do bring it into your relationship. Because I do think that I think that largely we as men have misinterpreted what women are saying when they say, I want you to be more vulnerable. I want you to open up more. She's not saying, tell me every single fear and piece of sadness every in the moment that you feel it every single time. You don't need to emotionally vomit at me all the time. She's also not saying, I want to become your emotional processing center, which is what a lot of men end up doing, is they hear their girlfriend or their wife say, I want you to open up more, I want you to be more vulnerable. And what he ends up hearing, because we think very linearly, is, okay, you want me to tell you what I'm feeling when I'm feeling it. And so guys start to do that. And what ends up happening is she kind of turns into this mother role, or she starts to emotionally process his emotions with him. And the relationship fundamentally shifts because all of a sudden he's outsourced emotional processing to her. And for a lot of men, what ends up happening, and this is kind of the nice guy thing, is he then becomes dependent and reliant on her for understanding his own emotions. And for her, that's not what she was wanting, right? For most women, they're not like, yeah, I want to help you understand your emotions. That's not it. Maybe for a brief period of time, maybe, in certain circumstances, but for the most part, what she's saying is, I want to know your depth. I want to know your depth. I want to know that you can go deeper inside of your own emotions, your own psyche, into your own fears, into your own insecurities, that you are aware of them, that you've had the courage and the bravery, and yet you're resourced enough with whatever it is, a therapist, good men in your life, to be able to understand yourself at your depths and then bring that forward. Right. So it's almost like, I want you to tell me what it is that you're feeling and experiencing, but I want you to do so in a way where it's still grounded, where you have somewhat of a grasp on what it is that you're going through, versus, here are my unbridled emotions that I'm just going to spew out at you on the table, and I need you to help me figure them all out. That's going to cause chaos and confusion. So I think we need to return to having solid male relationships. And I do think that there's really a lot of male loneliness today. I mean, you can see that, right? Young men do not have as many close friends as they used to. They're not talking about the same type of stuff. They're not supporting each other in the same kind of way. They're very disconnected. And I think that is one of the highest resources. And I think it's also, the last thing I'll say here is, we underestimate how valuable that is for women. Like, women when, there's a lot of talk of like high value men and in like red pill and stuff like that. Part of being a high value man is that you have other great men around you. And women look at that. Women look at the men that you surround yourself with. And if they're a bunch of like living at home in, mom and dad's basement playing video games and smoking pot at 40, that's going to say something about you, regardless of how successful you are. So I think it's important for you to surround yourself with men who are challenging you, confronting you, pushing you, supporting you, hearing you, and that you have a couple men or a group of men where you can bring the deeper parts of who you are into those relationships.
Hmm. How do you break the veil of subtle competition, which could guide the way that you communicate to other men to be a little bit deceptive, perhaps? Like there still could be a fear. Like there's a quote from Ram Dass who says, I'll make believe you are the person you think you are if you make believe I am the person I think I am. And when you're in the world, like the red pill world, and like, I want to be a high value man. It's like, well, what if I'm not a high value man? What if, the reality of my internal or external experience doesn't match the story of what I have been told a high value man is? I'll probably not be accepted. And if I'm not accepted, then I'll be a lower value man, which that creates a really terrible spiral. So coming into that authenticity can be, I think, very scary for someone. And I think many male relationships, there's a subtle competition brewing that perhaps no one really talks about.
Yeah, I mean, I always get a chuckle out of like all of the alpha influencers that are like all, selling the courses on how to teach you how to be alpha.
Yeah, bro.
I just find it.
That's my next thing.
That's your next thing. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
my
yeah.
next thing, bro.
We'll collaborate.
We
Three
got to
months from now,
collab.
you'll have the Alpha Kings court or something like that. Um, yeah, I do think that competition is an inherent part of male relationships, and I don't think it has to be a bad thing. I do think that we have to move from competition-based relationships to collaboration-based relationships as men. Like we really have to be able to see, okay, who are you trying to become and how do I support you in that endeavor? Instead of I'm at odds with you because you are more successful than me, or it can turn into a kind of dick measuring contest underneath. But I do think that that is a part of our masculine core or the psyche, that there's this inherent kind of grappling, not necessarily for uh, a place on the hierarchy, but that we want to see. I think in the best male relationships, we want to see each other succeed. And in order to do that, sometimes we can challenge each other. Sometimes we can confront each other. Sometimes we can support one another or give resources. And other times there is a competitive spirit that can come out that actually can be healthy. And but I think for a lot of men, it's the thing that they are silently not talking about. And so you kind of have to get it out on the table. Like, hey, I've been competing with you in this way, or hey, I feel less than you in this way, or I find myself like, resenting you because this part of your life is going so much better. And I do think that that's the job of the person who's built up the anger or the frustration or the resentment. It's your job as that man to clear that and get it out of the way. But I think when we as men move towards collaboration based relationships, where that's the sole intention of the relationship, as a friend, like, look, I want to help you be better, get better as a man, as a father, as a husband, as a business leader. I want to support you in that. And that's the intention. And you're willing to have agreements around getting some of that stuff out of the way when it arises, whether it's resentment or jealousy or envy or whatever it is. That's what's going to make for a really good relationship. But you have to find men that are willing to do that. And I think one of the things that I've learned about any type of relationship is that the best relationships, whether it's with you and your significant other or with you and your buddies, the relationships with zero guesswork are the best ones. The relationships where you do not have to guess whether the other person is holding resentment or hostility or jealousy or whatever. The relationships where you're saying, I'm committed to be in a relationship with you that has zero guesswork in it, where I don't have to continually guess where you're at or wonder whether or not you're holding some jealousy or resentment towards me or competing with me. Those are the best ones. And that takes work and it's confronting. And I think we as men need that type of confrontation, and we actually desire confrontation in a way for our own growth and development.
I think our nervous systems are quite binary in either this is safe or this is a threat. And when you're around someone that is disingenuous, and they might not even realize that they're disingenuous because they're so wrapped up in their own persona, and that will create a signal of a little bit of contraction or resistance to the world around that person. Because the world around that person says there's something inauthentic about that. They're hiding something. They could be hiding sweetness, vulnerability, a sad little boy, girl, whatever thing, or they could be hiding. They want to steal from me. They want to hurt me. They want to attack me. Like, we don't differentiate well unless you have some Christ consciousness thing where you just see empathy and love in all things, but most people aren't there. So you'll just see that inauthentic, disingenuous being as a potential threat. And that person that's acting disingenuously will wonder why the world is closing down to them. It's like, I'm fronting in all the ways, like I'm the peak alpha male. Why do I feel so alone? Or why did I miss that opportunity? Or why did this girl break up with me? Or it just didn't work out at all. And I think it's because ultimately people are seeking safety within their nervous systems. And when you are around someone, even if they don't have a lot of money or they don't have a lot of whatever, if they are truly courageous enough to be comfortable within themselves, you notice your own nervous system kind of relaxes a little bit. You're like, I don't know what it is, but I just feel comfortable around you. You don't need to do anything for me. You don't need to buy me something. Like, can we just be near each other? And then it's like the world comes in. But taking that step of, I am going to take the courageous leap into the unknown to actually be witnessed in the entirety of me. I think that's like the hero's journey in a lot of ways for folks. It's like the hardest thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Finding that safety is, I think, very, very challenging for a lot of men.
what is the biggest lie men believe about being a man from your perspective? And how is that potentially damaging them in ways they might not realize?
I mean, honestly, I think it's what I said before, which is that suppression equals strength. That if you just stuff shit down for long enough, that will be the answer to your problems, or that will be how you solve your problems and develop strength. And there is a time. I've worked with guys that are Navy SEALs or Marines, and or extreme athletes, and there are times where you do need to put how you feel about things aside in order to get something done. There is a kind of tactical and practical orientation towards that ability and that attribute. But if that becomes your way of living, which it has for so many men, you're going to walk through the world numb and unable to connect to the things that really matter to you. And I talk about numbness a lot, not as being emotionally empty, but being so emotionally full that your brain just sort of disconnects from what's happening in your body. That's what numbness actually is. It's not that you're empty, it's that you're completely overrun and full. Like the cup runneth over. And so I think that's the biggest lie. The impact of that, I think we've kind of touched on and covered, is that we get disconnected from the things that matter most to us and get deeply frustrated or depressed. I like what Jim Carrey said. He said depression is your body's way of saying fuck you. I love that. I think that's so true. And I think a lot of men have hidden, underlying depression, that manifests as just anger or complacency, rage or lethargy. And they oscillate back and forth between the two, or they just inhabit one or the other. And that's a result of having tried to suppress so much for so long. And it's just an ineffective method. And so the sooner that you can admit this shit isn't working, this method of dealing with how I feel inside is not working, the sooner that you can actually start to change what's going on inside of you.
And maybe it worked to get me here, but it's not going to work to get me where I actually desire to go now. And then the to complete what you the Jim Carrey quote, I think is going, depression is your body saying F you, I don't want to be this character anymore. I don't want to hold up this avatar that you've created in the world. It's too much for me.
Love it. It's true. It's true. So we have to go through a kind of breaking down. I think a lot of men have undervalued the process of breakdown. And in alchemy, they call it the negredo, right? The blackening, the darkening, the falling apart. And it's this period of time where we go through part of, and this is part of an initiation process, but we go through having everything kind of break down. And I think for a lot of men, because we haven't had any type of initiatory practices or rituals, we've stripped mined that out of our culture and our society. There's no crossing of the threshold into manhood. There's no crossing of the threshold into being a man or being an adult male. And it's very ambiguous for a lot of men. And I talk to men all the time who are like, yeah, I feel I'm 60 years old and I still feel like I'm 20. I'm 45, I have all this responsibility, but I feel like a teenager. And so there's value and merit in having things fall apart. And initiation is called the descent, where you go down into the pain and the grief and the suffering, and it's a hard time. It's not fun. It's not meant to be fun. But I think in our modern culture, we avoid that at all costs. So many men are like, they're just patching their lives up constantly. They're patching up the boat constantly, and not letting it just sort of fall apart and admit that like that's what needs to happen for a while. And so I think a lot of men also use rock bottom as an initiation. I did that. I blew up my entire life. I blew up my relationship. I blew up my career. I did that unconsciously, but I did that in a way to kind of test, like, can I get through this? Do I have what it takes to get through this? And so I think in the absence of traditional initiation, what a lot of men are doing are creating these kind of pseudo initiations. And so there's a lot of pseudo relationships, right? Porn's a pseudo relationship. It creates this faux attachment, this pseudo attachment where we feel a connection to that OnlyFans chick or to that porn that we're watching. And our brain can't really distinguish the difference between the two. And so it creates this kind of pseudo attachment. But the more that you can shift those aside and start to give yourself real connection and let yourself I feel like I'm not really giving great like wanted advice here, but like let yourself fall apart in some moments, and start to hear the truth inside of you that's trying to be revealed, then you're on a path, right? And that actually is a part of the hero's journey. Initiation requires you to hear the call, to move into the descent, to let things fall apart, to move into the unknown. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm uncertain. Most men have zero tolerance for uncertainty, zero fucking tolerance. They hate it. And so they sit in their head mentally masturbating all day long, trying to figure out exactly what's going to happen and when it's going to happen and how it's going to happen and what they should say. It's exhausting. So we have to be able to expand that tolerance, that window of tolerance for the unknown.
Yeah. In some ways you can be, I mean, I think what you're saying, there could be an availability of having a reflection of gratitude for how hard things have become in a person's life if things are getting quite challenging, because you're finally at a point where you have to change and you have to grow and you have to evolve and you have to actually come into this much more enlivened, liberated, expressed, self-actualized, like gangster ass version of yourself that you've just been afraid of your whole life. And the universe, God, your subconscious, whatever, is like, sorry bud, like you're right at the point, like the the light is, what is it? That's the darkest just before the dawn. The light is darkest just before the
Mm-hmm.
dawn.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there can potentially be a solace in that of like, it's kind of like buying the dip in the stock market. It's like, this is so bad. This almost has to be setting me up for greatness. Like, this is so bad. Like, invest. Like, today is the day. Go all in.
Yeah.
Don't back up. And I think that that's, there could be a solace in like, wow, shit's bad.
Yeah.
Like, we're gonna learn. We're gonna grow.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, the sort of like cliche quote of most men live lives of quiet desperation.
Yeah, it's not
Is
bad. It's not bad enough.
it's not bad enough, right? It's like the dog sitting on the nail and he doesn't want to get off, right? And the farmer says he'll get off when it's painful enough. Well, a lot of men will just sit on that nail,
Yeah,
and then what they do
and
is
then
they
you
amass.
die.
Yeah, well, yeah, you die, but you amass all of these behaviors to cope with the fact that you fucking hate your job, or you hate the relationship that you're in, or you're trying to hold everything together, and so you won't allow yourself to let things fall apart because you don't want to be perceived in that way. And sometimes, we have to, and that's the ground where we discover ourselves, which is brutal. It's a brutal way to really find who you are. But I think for a lot of men, that is the process of self-discovery, is that they they destroy something in their life that matters to them. Things fall apart, they lose something that matters to them, and then they begin to discover, oh, this is who I actually am. And up until that point, it was all kind of a bit hazy and foggy.
Yeah, we have like this, and we'll wrap up. Do you got to go like now? Now, or you got a couple minutes to kind of land the plane? I did a call with like Charles Eisenstein yesterday in this like group call thing, and he's very smart. He wrote a book called Sacred Economics, and one of the things he was talking about in the call was this imitation of wealth that we have. And he was referencing another story. I don't know the details of the other story right now, but it was something along the lines of, if you can buy the things that you want, that's not real wealth. Like, wealth would be the things that are built from your uncle and from your aunt and from your friend, and it's like within the tribe of like, oh, there's memory imprinted in this from people who care and that I care about. Like, that type of wealth can't be purchased. Like, that's like you pressing buy on Amazon of whatever the heck you want because you have enough digital numbers on your screen is not comparable to the individual that has created a network, a tribe of individuals in their life that actually can infuse life and love and energy into the materials around them and into just their beingness around them. And I think that the more a person lacks genuine wealth, which is like the free stuff for the most part, the more they will compensate for an imitation of wealth. And they will continue to feel empty, and they will continue filling that void with more imitations until eventually the nail gets so sharp and so painful, hopefully, that they have to change. But it becomes more confusing. It's like the Bible verse of, however the easier for an elephant to get through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven, or whatever. Like, the meaning of that probably has a lot of meanings. But if you have a lot of stuff and you have a lot of insulation, it's almost like your deeper learning can get stifled in a way because you can compensate longer. Anyway, that's not a question. I'm sorry.
No, it's very, very true. It's very true. Yeah. I mean, I do think that we largely chase things for the wrong reasons. This is like the classic nice guy thing of pursuing validation externally and hoping that it will fuel you somehow internally, that you'll feel good about yourself. And I think that, I do think that in the future, and what's happening right now in our culture and our society and what's coming, is that men who are grounded in their nervous system and they can withstand the chaos of what's happening whether it's politically or financially or with AI or, like there's a real disruption to objective reality in a lot of ways. There's a real disruption to objective truth and objective reality. And I think that men who are able to stay relational and stay grounded in those relationships will be the men who are the deepest in satisfaction and are of the greatest of contribution. Like I do think that there's something incredibly wealthy and valuable about that, because you're giving yourself to something that is so much bigger than yourself. And that's important. That's really, really important. And there's something in us as men that I think desires that.
So good. Thank you, man. I appreciate you. And so you have, you were mentioning before, you have a group for folks that they can get involved in if they want to go deeper into this stuff. You have all sorts of options. I mean, I appreciate you as just a human and friend, but also your work is amazing. Is there some place that people can go from here to go deeper into your stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the best way is you can go to, it's ManTalks everywhere, just ManTalks on YouTube, on Instagram, mantalks.com. But we do have a group of over 800 men from around the world that are a part of something called the Alliance. And the Alliance is really a space where what we're trying to build out is the number one place for therapeutic and personal growth for men. And so our tagline is, it's not therapy, it's training. And so it's helping you to become a more self-led man, and to respect yourself at a deeper level. So you can check out the Alliance. We've got, in-person men's weekends that you can check out. You can check out my book, Men's Work. Those are all the places to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you. That is it. That is all. I'll see you next week. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed that episode, you might also enjoy this episode over here, as well as this one over here. Thank you for subscribing. Appreciate you. I'll see you in the next video.